This video is sponsoring World Computer Exchange, a nonprofit that refurbishes donated computers and electronics and ships them to schools, libraries, and youth programs around the world. They're helping close the digital divide and give kids the tools to learn, create, and connect. Consider donating your old, unused tech today by going to worldcomputerexchange.org. 100% of the ad revenue from this video will be donated to this charity. I feel like this video is going to potentially get me into some really hot water, but I'm just going to ask at the very beginning here to just try and hear me out. Now, we've talked a lot about the first iPhone on this channel so far, but for those of you that are new, I want to give you a short history of kind of what led us to where we are now with the iPhone 3G, because I feel like it's pretty necessary. So when the first iPhone launched back in 2007, it was notoriously expensive. It cost $500 with a mandatory 2-year contract on AT&T. Now, it also didn't have any 3G capabilities. Not having 3G was very controversial, especially considering flip phones at the time, such as the later generation Motorola Razrs, including this one, launched with 3G. And this phone came out in 2006, a year before the iPhone. Now, Apple tried to justify saying that 3G wasn't necessary on their iPhones because they hoped that their user base would primarily be on Wi-Fi, and that you would only have to fall back to Edge or 2G if you were out and about, and that wouldn't be very often and you weren't doing anything too intensive. And their whole idea that I can understand it as is that Edge should be plenty for what you need to do when you're out and about. Otherwise, jump on Wi-Fi for all the other tasks because it's high speed. Obviously, people didn't really follow that because they want a phone to use as a phone, and when you're out and about and not on Wi-Fi, it should work the same as Wi-Fi. That's where the iPhone 3G came in with the promise to fix all of that. And it kind of did, but for the most part, didn't. Apple launched the iPhone 3G at a much cheaper price at $200, even though that still required an AT&T contract. But it still had the same storage options as the 2G at the time, which was 8 gigabytes and 16 gigabytes. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now, one of the selling features of the 3G was the fact that it came with iPhone OS 2.0 installed already, and that included the App Store. Now, we've talked a bit about the App Store in a couple other videos. It was a big deal to have the App Store installed on the iPhone, so that drove a lot of people to buy this phone, even though it came on the 2G as well. Knowing that it was a flagship feature, the 3G was definitely added on top of that. Now, reception from both critics and consumers about the iPhone 3G back in 2008 were very mixed. In a lot of ways, there were some great upgrades in this phone, but in a lot of other ways, there were some very heavy drawbacks. And that leads perfectly into the topic of this video, in those drawbacks making this phone, in my opinion, the worst in the lineup. Now, the first thing you'll notice with this phone is it has a very different design, especially when you consider it from the 2G. We lost the nice metal back with the antenna band on the bottom, and now the entire phone is plastic. But it wasn't just plastic, because not all plastics are created equally. It's a very cheap. It kind of feels flimsy, it sounds flimsy, and it is flimsy. In fact, it's very notorious on the back here near the charging port. There's this crack, and nearly every single one of these phones had this crack in it because this plastic was just not super great. Now, I will give it the fact that it is very aerodynamic and it feels really good in the hand, but the aerodynamics make it look like every other phone at the time. It kind of looked less unique than the first iPhone. That was okay. I guess it's more of a form over function sort of situation. Now, as mentioned earlier in the video, unfortunately, the iPhone 3G only came in 8 and 16 gigabyte variants, the exact same variants as the 2G. There were no really upgrades available. 32 gigabyte came later with the 3GS. That's a common mistake a lot of people think. So no, there was no 32 gigabyte 3G. You were stuck with only the two options that Apple had at the time. Now, one of the biggest complaints about this phone, design aside, was actually the performance of how this phone ran. It has identical, almost down to the exact numbers, internals of the first iPhone. Same CPU, GPU, RAM. It's basically the same phone, just pushed into a different case. Now, the problem here is they added more features to the iPhone 3G than the first iPhone, and that actually meant the 3G ran worse in some cases than the first iPhone. So it's very much considered a potential downgrade by buying this phone. Now, adding insult to injury with having the same internals as the first iPhone, They kept the same battery as well, and then they slapped a 3G modem in here, which was very power hungry, and battery life was atrocious on this phone. In fact, Apple added an option to disable 3G on this phone, and a lot of people did that back in the day just to make it last throughout the day. That kind of negates the whole purpose of upgrading from the first to the 3G if you can't even use 3G. Oh, but my friends, it doesn't stop there. It gets even worse, because when you consider all the drawbacks that we're already experiencing, on top of that, 3G wasn't even worth it. It was spotty, it was weak, this phone was notorious for dropped calls, data was not at all what they were advertising. It was a mess, and it was a chaotic disaster when this phone launched. Adding on top of the internals, not just the processing and memory and all that, but externally there were things that were very similar too, including basically the same camera as the first iPhone. It was still 2 megapixels, no autofocus, and no video recording. One of the most requested features of the first phone still did not land on the 3G. Other phones at the time were even pushing 5 megapixels. That's what was common. So this was very far behind, and an incredible disappointment to a lot of iPhone fans. Now, Bluetooth was also another very controversial part of this phone, because it still, just like the first iPhone, was limited to just voice calls over Apple's first-party earpiece. No Bluetooth music streaming to like a car or a Bluetooth speaker, which were becoming more popular at the time. That's gone, non-existent, even in the 3G. That again didn't come until the 3GS a year later. Now, as the years went on, the iPhone 3G continued to get software updates. Apple used to charge for them back in the day, but that's another story. However, it only got 2 more years of support. It launched on iPhone OS 2, it got iPhone OS 3, and then it got iOS 4. iOS 4 was a huge rebrand at the time. It gave you a whole lot of features, and it's where the iPhone really started to feel premium. And it even launched on the iPhone 4, a very big leap for the iPhone. However, the poor 3G got virtually none of those features. You can already see just by looking at the home screen, there's no wallpaper, there's no multitasking if you double tap the home button, it just takes you to the phone app. It feels like you're still using iPhone OS 3, just with a new dock. That's basically all you got. And this just was so disappointing to have a 2-year-old phone. This was only 2 years old at the time, and it was already obsolete. You got nothing new, nothing exciting, and it just felt like such a betrayal to have this phone become so old so fast. After the first iPhone, which only had iPhone OS 1 through 3, this only had 2 through 4, one of the shortest lifespans of any iPhone ever. Incredibly disappointing to those that were early adopters and wanting to get the best that Apple had to offer for the time, and only getting 2 years support. That's really sad. Basically, the iPhone 3G was just Apple stumbling to figure out where their consumer market was. The first iPhone was too premium, too expensive, that not a lot of people went into it. So they did the 3G to try and get the consumers on board and get more people into the iPhone ecosystem. Now, unfortunately, this phone was a necessary evil because it was a stepping stone to the 3GS, a cult classic. A lot of people love the 3GS, even to this day. People have a lot of nostalgia about it, and it was an incredible upgrade from this phone. Unfortunately, it left this phone just being obsolete right as it left the gate. It was doomed to fail from the very beginning because that's how Apple designed it to be. It wasn't supposed to be revolutionary. It wasn't supposed to be life-changing. It was just supposed to be, here's a cheaper iPhone with some of the things people really wanted, but a lot of stuff that people wanted missing in favor of that cheaper price. I hope you enjoyed my rant on the iPhone 3G. I actually had to buy one specifically for this video because I just don't like it that much, that I have virtually every other iPhone but this one up until now, and I don't plan on keeping it. I really just do not like this phone. I didn't like it back in the day either, so it's just kind of been a lifelong feeling of this rant building up inside me, and I finally got it out. With that, I hope that I didn't offend anyone who does really like this phone. I understand there were a lot of people who adopted it early, and it means a lot to them, and I respect that. I just wanted to bring up the downfalls and what actually led us to where we are now. So it was just kind of a fun look back as well as a rant. What do you think of the hot takes I made in this video? Do you agree with them? Do you have other thoughts? I'd also like to know, if you don't think this is the worst iPhone on the lineup, which one is your least favorite? Feel free to have a discussion down in the comments. I think that would be a fun conversation to have.